is we have 2 paraprofessionals that manage the 3 computer labs among the 3 schools, and then we have paraprofessionals that staff the library, 1 here, and then 2 at the elementary level that cover the 3 elementary libraries. They all get paid the same rate.
Okay.
The other question was substitutes.
Yeah, substitutes. We have had issues where we've had to hire long-term substitutes to replace teachers or other professional staff members who are out on medical leave. And we have 2 long-term subs that are currently in place potentially for the rest of the school year.
And are they paid at the daily substitute rate just times the number of days they work, or they get a higher?
They're paid at a Bachelor 1 rate.
Oh, okay.
They're paid at the Bachelor 1 rate.
Okay.
So in effect, if the person who's not working has sufficient sick days, if they've saved sick days, the outcome is that in effect, you have new employees that you're paying.
Right.
And 2 of those is all you need to explain this increase. And we've had situations like that this year and last year. You also mentioned athletics,
Right.
coaching and I think you were astute in picking out the 3 areas that rose above the norm. What you see in coaches is that in FY09, school committee instructed us to, I want to say, clean out or reduce the balances of the athletic revolving account. So that's what we did. We used almost all of the reserve funds or unspent funds in the athletic revolving, applied that as an offset against this fiscal year.
Okay.
So as you move into FY10, you won't have that little bonus to apply to the costs,
Okay.
so that the percentage increase from FY10 to FY09 looks high.
Okay.
But it's not a
Yeah.
huge dollar figure.
No.
Cal, on
No,
page
it's
10, I'm a
yeah.
little confused too. If you look at page 10, and it talks about the fiscal year 10 salary detail for athletics.
Yeah.
The 2 columns are labeled FY08
Yeah,
and FY10.
that's the error I just referred to.
Okay.
FY09 should be there, and
All
I'm
right.
going to have to provide that, I'm sorry.
But if you look at the athletics, I just did a breakdown of the fiscal year 2010 budget, and it looks to me like it's $433,713. That's total for everything. And the amount that will be offset by the revolving account is $216,300. So essentially, it's exactly, almost to the dollar, 50% of the entire athletic operating
Right.
budget
Yeah.
is offset by the revolving account. So our budget for athletics by appropriation is $217,000. And that's not dramatically different. It's about a 50-50, so the change isn't very different from any
Right.
other fiscal year over
Yeah,
the last
it's
several
been a-
years.
Right.
And what we do is, the entire cost of everything other than coaches is paid for by the revolving fund. That's about $150,000.
There are some expenses I can show you, not a lot.
Okay.
There are.
But then the coaches, which is, this year is gonna be $277,000, we're also appropriating $60,000 from the revolving account to offset that $277.
Right.
But it is about a 50-50 split, and the percentage of the entire budget hasn't changed much. It's still less than 1%, the appropriation for athletics.
And I think also in athletics, I want to point out that a lot of the new uniforms you see, new equipment, oftentimes that's not paid for by the school department. It's a lot of times paid
A lot
for
of
by
boosters,
boosters.
yeah.
So we probably get, I don't even know how you quantify the tens of thousands of dollars we probably get from boosters, buying equipment and uniforms, and sometimes helping to pay for transportation.
And ice time,
And
things
ice
like that
time,
for the
and-
boosters.
right,
No, we couldn't do it without them.
right.
Jerry
Yep.
summarized athletics very well there. If the FY09 column was shown on this page, it isn't, you would have seen an athletic revolving offset in FY09 of $90,000.
Is the difference.
So that explains the 15% increase. It's almost
Okay.
like an anomaly
Yeah.
just that 1 year.
Yeah.
So basically, right now, we're spending down the revolving
Yeah.
account pretty much to
Yeah.
what's available in the account, which is what we used to do.
Which is, well, I think appropriate. I mean, I guess we can debate how much money should be left in all these revolving accounts, but I think we had agreed as a group that when the athletic revolving account got into the 50 or 60, we had a year-end balance the previous year of about $55,000 or $60,000. So the thinking was, let's have that
Yep.
and apply that against the program to keep the number.
Well, I think the purpose of
Right.
revolving account is essentially to offset expenses for that
Yeah.
fiscal year, and that's what we're doing here. The money coming in is basically going back out again.
I'll continue to monitor the balances in athletic revolving in hopes that possibly we can apply more to FY10. At this stage, the amount I have in there, 60, is what I'm recommending.
Well, my guess is based on, I was looking at the superintendent's website where they have all the fees for the various towns, various districts, and there aren't that many that are higher than ours in sports, and my guess is we're probably covering a larger percentage of our sports budget with fees than most other districts in this state. I don't think there's any question about that.
A couple other quick comments, and then I'll talk a little bit about the days and weeks and months to come. On page 5 is where you summarize the expenses by category. And of course, you see greater detail in the document that follows, but using Mel's approach to looking at those areas that seem to be higher than others, the first one you run into, I'm looking at the far right-hand column at the percentage increases.
Right.
I see 3.2%, I see 3.2%, then I see 6.7% under the student services area. And as you look up above, you see that the bulk of that increase is in special education transportation. You see special ed transportation is budgeted at $486,000 this year, as opposed to $442 in FY09. So as you dig down into this budget, those same themes keep coming back at you. I look down a little farther at a 10% increase in operations and maintenance, and the primary increase there, as you look at some of the line item detail, you see utility services as having increased by, I'm looking at about $70,000 there. And once again, that's the largest component of that increase. We're forecasting fixed charges and equipment to be approximately level, and then when you go down to tuition, that 11.1% increase, and that's the killer. You see tuition, special education tuitions being forecast to increase at that level.
And percentages are all relative too. That's a percentage of a big number.
Yeah.
So that 11% translates into $150,000. So that's a significant number.
Sure, exactly.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, I was gonna-
$225,000.
Yeah, so, thank you, Terry. And so, that was, I alluded that earlier in our budget drivers. I think that the school department understands that this budget as it stands is going to have to undergo a lot of scrutiny. And the superintendent has appointed half dozen study groups to look at, to quantify various pieces in this budget and to report back to him with recommendations for some potentially critical changes that need to be made. You know, just an example, how much would it save if we did not provide 2% increases to all the schools? Let's say we would do something radical and say, listen, given the times, maybe we're going to decrease the school budgets by 5%. You know, there's one. There's another study group looking at the school calendar. In fact, we're meeting Christmas Eve morning at 9 o'clock, the study group on calendar.
I'll be there.
I'd like to be
Yeah,
there.
I'd like to be there. I
9
can't, I don't know
o'clock.
if I can make it.
At Mr.
Get it on
Bernard's
your
office.
calendar?
I gotta do my
Carl,
Christmas
there's
shopping.
an item there that says small textbooks, small capital textbook
Yeah.
purchases. Did we do that this year?
No.
No, but we had to squeeze it in last year. We had to buy books at the end of last fiscal year because the selectmen, I think, said, I don't know, there was what, 70,000 or some
Yeah.
amount?
It's-
And we did it last year. We didn't buy any this year.
No, you're
So,
correct.
but you're putting it in.
Well, again, that's yes, it is in here at this point, because once again, we tried to stay true to the concept of level services. Does the school department need to invest in new textbook adoption once each year? The answer is yes. Whether that survives the process, that's another question, but it's in there. I should also comment that the very last page of this document, page 29 and 30, does represent this year's small capital requests, and they amount to a lot more money than what we put into the budget. So, in closing, I don't know what that. In closing, we understand there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Where was it?
And some of the study groups that the superintendent has appointed are looking at some pretty significant changes. In school restructuring, and inevitably they have to involve personnel. You can't make a change, you can't reach level funding without changes in personnel. And a lot of those, all of that research is underway now, and I'll let the superintendent comment further on that in terms of timetable, but I think that during the month of January, it will be incumbent upon these study groups to report back to the superintendent with their conclusions about some of the major challenges that he's given us.
I think one item in the budget that I'd like to see is radiant heating for the library. Because from about 3 feet down, it's just brutal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maureen.
That's a $1.7 million increase. And in a couple of cases, you alluded to the fact that we didn't actually make those purchases in '09, like with the small capital and the textbooks. But they were in our proposed '09 budget. We just went through so many different levels of cuts last year. Could you go through that budget and take those specific items out, the ones that you put back in?
Yeah.
What would that number look like? $1 million as opposed to 1.7?
No, I don't think it would be as high as $1 million. Well, you start with small cap, that would be 100,000 off the top. So I'm not sure it's really not my job to suggest what the cuts were, but.
No, I don't mean to cut, I mean to get a picture of real
Textbooks.
level services for what was put in place July 1st.
Okay, so you're saying a more realistic comparative way to compare. I wish I could say it was as high as $1 million, but we have to hark back to that budget driver page to help answer that question. We're seeing about $1.5 million worth of increases there based on salaries and special education.
I think,
Right.
yeah, I think
And I
that-
don't think they are necessarily the items that I would say start off cutting right away. I just think it makes the point that we've been eroding. Every time we sit down and look at a budget, we cross something out. So we've been eroding the basis.
Yeah, I think I might be taking a different tack than some of the other committee members, but I just feel that whether it be 5%, 6%, or 7%, those kind of annual increases aren't sustainable or supportable. They're just not. Even if we're in a society that was, filled with some level of riches that they could, kind of bestow this money upon us, it all gets back to, we've always talked about it's a statewide system problem, but it's also a problem with communities, it's a problem with contracts and the way they were written, 30 years ago, and then you never change the contract, you just add to it and add to it and add to it and add to it, to get to the point where you have a contract that has a life of its own, basically.
Yes.
And I think, you see the town budgets in many towns go up 2 to 3% a year, and that's their level services. And I think that we have to strive to figure out how to get to that 2 to 3% increase, especially if we have a population of students that's stabilizing and then eventually decreasing, although not by a lot, over the next 10 to 15 years. We're only looking at maybe 150, 200 student drop at the most. So it's not like we're losing a large population. But I think we have to figure out, and I think the state, the leadership of the two state teacher unions have to sit down and figure out how to make school budgets sustainable with growth on a year-to-year basis, because it's gotten to the point where every town has this issue right now. How do I sustain 5, 6, 7, 8% just for level services.